Abdul, thank you so much for coming on to the Sheridans Backpage podcast. We've been doing these things now for about, well, actually since sort of February time, sort of beginning of, beginning of the end of the lockdown period, really, just as a way to connect to like-minded people, to talk about people's stories that we find quite interesting. And sort of the great thing is we've developed a good friendship over probably the last couple of years now, and we couldn't think of anything better than to try and get you on and invite you to chat about loads of things. I was mentioning beforehand in the prep, it's like you've already lived such an incredibly interesting life. And I felt a little bit exhausted actually after I was doing all the research, being like, oh my God, he's done this, and we'll get on to all of that as well. But firstly, thanks so much for joining us today. It's wicked to have you on, and hopefully we'll get to some interesting bits and pieces shortly.
Thanks very much, Dan, and the Sheridans team. I'm delighted you asked, and I'm really looking forward to just, I guess, sharing my experience and thoughts so far. It's been a bit of a strange year so far, so yeah, it's nice to be doing something really upbeat.
Wicked. Well, I'm really glad. Well, I was actually trying to work out about where to actually start our conversation, is the truth. And I was thinking, am I going to do it chronological? Am I going to do it by the main events? Are we going to do it about particular experiences you had? And the first thing that I don't want to sort of go on too much about all the background and stuff, because people like literally can Google you, and there's tons of cool stuff in terms of backgrounds. But by way of at least brief background, I mean, you have come from an elite sports background into and pivoted and transitioned into then a wealth management role at Credit Suisse. Two incredibly different lifestyles, two incredibly different skill sets. So if I can, and just do one thing first, is to ask, because obviously you are and have been an Olympic athlete, and a fantastic discus thrower. Can I ask, maybe, I know we've talked about it before, why the discus?
It's literally by accident. So used to live in a council estate in Brixton in Angeltown, and my parents didn't want me to get involved with anything unsavoury. So I was a church hall not too far from the estates there, and I joined the Scouts group there. So every Friday, I'd be there after school with the older guys. And there was one particular evening, it was like a sports-themed evening, and I happened to throw a ball accurately from one side of the hall to another side of the hall into a bucket. I think I did it 6 times in a row straight into the bucket. And it was, at the time, I mean, I didn't think anything of it, but clearly my scout leader, the late Stan Allen, recognised something and took me down to Tootenbeck track. And that was my first experience of, one, ever going to a track, and then 2, just being exposed to athletics. And at first, I was probably more involved in the track events than I was the field events. And then I realised then that having been taught by my first coach, Mike Winch, that I actually do really enjoy the discus. But I didn't actually take it up more seriously until 2000, after watching the Athens Olympics. I was inspired when I saw Virginijus Alekna win a Lithuanian discus thrower through 70 meters, and I was literally in awe. And ever since watching that, I thought, yeah, I want to do that, and the rest is history.
I'm fascinated in athlete mindset, motivation, inspiration stuff generally. I read something, I was doing a bit of research, that your first Olympic memory was Linford Christie in the 92 Barca Olympics. And then how from 96 onwards, you obviously were completely transfixed, and that almost became maybe your anchor, the anchor motivation, or particular things. Were there particular things throughout the process that you were thinking of when you were developing your skill in the discus? You were like, this is why I want to do it. This is how I'm going to keep on doing it. This is why I want to do it. All of those things. Or was it simply just a matter of, I quite like doing it. I like the routine, and why not keep doing something that I'm quite good at?
To be honest, to begin with, it was just purely, I really enjoy throwing a discus. I really enjoy being strong, powerful, quick. I enjoyed the training, and I wanted to be good at it. As I got better at it via just competitions and just harnessing my skill, it became something where I just really want to be the best I can be in it. So I became just a massive self-critic of myself. I wanted to, so if the target was, say, I don't know, to throw 20 meters, I wanted to throw 30 meters. The target was 30 meters, I want to throw 40 meters. And even if I throw in a PB in, say, a competition, I was saying to myself, actually, I want more. I was never satisfied. And whilst that can be a good thing, it can actually be a challenging, because I think as an athlete, or just generally as a person, you've got to just be able to embrace the small wins.
And
I think, yeah, and I wasn't very good at that. Not to begin with, I always found myself, I was frustrated I didn't achieve more. And it was similar in the gym too, or on the track. We'd have timed races over 30 meters, or we have to do a standing lung jump, or whatever it was. And even though I'd done well, I'd jumped a PB or I'd run fast, etc., I always wanted more. I wanted to do one more extra. And as I got older, I think making that transition, I think from, if you like, county and national athlete to international elite training full time, I recognized that Rome can't be built in a day, and I needed to accept my small wins and then table them and come back again and grow. And that maturity only came from me changing my environment from Southwest London at Crystal Palace to Loughborough University, where I was around many other elite athletes across several different sports. And then in that environment, you just see that everybody's aspiring for the same goal, which is to be better, but equally recognizing that once they have achieved that goal, they accept it and then rebuild. And then that kind of then said to me that, okay, I needed to try and calm myself, because I was, if you like, I'm quite I'm the type of guy that doesn't sit down easily. I literally like to keep busy. I always want to do more. I'm always inquisitive. I want to find out why things happen, or what can be done to improve. So for me, I just needed to understand that sometimes winning only was it a good thing, but it was also time for me to accept that I had worked hard, accomplished my goal, but also worked towards something new. And at the time, I think for me, certainly when I was younger, I struggled with that. And I think if I'm being entirely honest with myself, even today, there are small wins in my life that I don't celebrate. And I'm starting to just learn to improve on that trait. It's taken time, but yeah, we're getting there.
Don't get me started on that. I mean, I could go on all day about the type of things where, you know, we berate ourselves when things aren't great, but can't celebrate stuff when things actually are good. And it's not necessarily need to go out and party for a week, but almost take the kudos of a job well done and congratulate yourself for doing that and taking a second to breathe and sort of soak it in a little bit. So you go from South London to Loughborough. At what point did you actually realise, being obviously in a very different environment, that you were good enough, if you kept on practicing, to obviously get to Olympics, to be a GB athlete and to be sort of in the elite band of athletes? And did that spur you on? Did that create more pressure? Did it invoke different types of emotions at that point?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. It's one I think is probably quite close to my heart. So I started Credit Suisse in 2007. In 2008, Lehman's, for those who aren't familiar, went into administration, effectively just went bankrupt. And then I was working very, very long hours, to the early hours of the morning. That same year, I was also trying to qualify for the Beijing Olympic Games. A very long story short, I missed out by 70 centimeters. Massively disappointed, and clearly very frustrated. Not long after that, we'd won the opportunity to hold 212. And I knew that I had to make a choice then. It was either quit athletics and focus on my career, or a way of actually turning that disappointment into something more positive and making the London Olympic Games. I chose to follow my passion and relocate to Loughborough. And for me, to this day, it literally is the best decision I've made in my athletics career. I relocated there to a coach at the time, so I left my old coach to a brand new coach, new environment. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't certainly nervous, anxious. I was moving to an environment that was the unknown. Although I'd competed at Loughborough, I'd never lived there and trained full time. Most of my training leading into Loughborough typically was in the evenings and on weekends. So I've gone from that environment to now training in the day, 2 sessions a day, sometimes 3 sessions a day, with a very comprehensive program, which in the first year I was all beaten up. I was absolutely shattered mentally and physically, but it did me the world of good. And I knew if I could withstand that training, I'd be up there. I was confident, not necessarily at the time in my technique, but certainly confident that I could accomplish my goal. And the reason I felt so strongly about it is having worked the hours I was working and missing out from such a small margin, for me, demonstrated that there was more in the tank. And I just needed to focus a little bit more on that. And more importantly, give myself the best opportunity to accomplish my goals. So I went down from, if you like, 5 days a week down to 2 days a week at Credit Suisse, and then relocated to the Loughborough. So my typical week would be Monday and Tuesday in the office, and then Monday evening I'd train at Crystal Palace and it'd be a weight session. And then I'd travel up to Loughborough on a Tuesday evening, and by first thing Wednesday morning, I'd be doing a morning session. It would be weights, followed by core, and then a throwing session. And my throwing sessions will typically, so I'd be doing in excess of, 80 to 90 throws a session. And in the peak of the winter, the height of it, I was doing probably 100 to 110 throws a day. So my volume went up massively, but I think the volume itself is what I needed, notwithstanding the fact that I clearly need to improve my technique, but I just needed to get a base of throwing in me. This is not similar to, say, if you were a sprinter. Most sprinters can run one race and run, 10-1, 10-0, but can you run 10 races of season at a consistently high level? And effectively, those throws were enabling me to get, one, to solidify my technique, and two, to get a base of throwing strength in me to enable me to withstand an athletic season. And if I wanted to be amongst kind of the best guys in the world, which was my ambition, not to be the best guy in the UK, then I needed to put in that amount of work. And that amount of work, to begin with, was like anything. It's tough, it's not enjoyable, it's just the donkey work. But eventually, as you start to see, I come back to it again, small gains, small wins. Your confidence starts to build. You look forward to training. You aspire to want to do more, and then hopefully you see the benefits of your hard work in the season. Sadly for me, the 2010 season was not a success for me. So I actually had a couple of career-threatening injuries. So I tore my right adductor off the bone that season, and the left one, grade 3. So both adductors, effectively right and left, were completely gone, which I was devastated at emotionally. And it would have been my first opportunity to go to the Commonwealth Games in 2010 to, I think it was held in Delhi. I was selected for it, and I didn't go to it. So I had 3 options available to me in terms of remediating the adductors. The first was to have an operation similar to almost like a hernia to fix both adductors. The second was to get a cortisones or some sort of steroid injected in there, so it would enable me to compete at the Commonwealth Games and then come back and remediate the actual injury. And the third was to not do either of those 2 options and to just focus on conservatively rehabbing it. I chose the latter, which is just to conservatively rehab it. And for me, I chose that because I was more focused on long-term rather than short-term goals. I knew that I wanted to throw the discus for at least another 5, 6, 7 years. And there clearly was an inherent issue or weakness in that area. So it comes back to, again, foundation. Fix the foundation, and anything else can withstand the work that you want to do. So I did. I chose to do that, and again, really glad I did. The following year, I threw a massive throw. I went from 61.70, I think, to 65.44. Literally went from 100th in the world to top 10 quite quickly. I think I finished the season that year, I think 22nd in the world. I won the British trials, which enabled me to get selected for the World Championship in Korea. And then I also won the English trials too. So it's very rare you get athletes, to be fair, in most events that win both domestic titles. Again, that was, if I hadn't have done the foundation work, and similarly, if I hadn't have kind of chosen to rehab, I don't think I would have achieved those accolades. But from a mental perspective, it was particularly tough because you have to have complete faith and autonomy in terms of how you rehab, but also focusing on the end goal. There are lots of opinions and views and demons that will come to you, and did come to me during that period. And I think I dealt with it by just really focusing on what I needed to do, just taking it day by day. I knew what I wanted long-term wise, but on a short-term wise, a day-to-day basis, I just focused on the little things I needed to do. There were some days in rehab that went really well, and there were some days with just absolute agony, and I felt like, oh, this is awful. But a key thing is, I try to just focus on the positives, because I recognize from various injuries that you can always come back. It's just a mindset in terms of how you come back. And I think once you realize that, you can kind of manage your body. You become very in tune with your body, and you know what works and what doesn't work. So, and most to be fair, most professional sportsmen and women will always know very quickly as they get older, more mature in their sport and event, how to get themselves more prepared for what they need to do.
So then, can I ask, because it's an interesting development. So you go from disappointment of Commonwealth Games injury to throwing 65.44, to then the European Athletics Championships in Helsinki, to then the Olympic trials in June in Birmingham, where you finished third, I think, with the throw just under 61.
Yeah.
And that means effectively that you're outside of the automatic selection for the 12 Olympics. Yep. You've got the Olympics coming up in August 12, and in order to get the Olympic qualifying standard, you need to throw whatever 65.24, or that's the throw that you did actually throw in the end in northwest London. How late in the day basically was this situation for you to be able to throw a qualifying standard throw in order to actually make the Olympics in London, in your hometown, a month later?
Yeah, that was a unique year. It's probably, I mean, I think it's the first time, I think, in British history where we've had a very competitive discus event. So that year we had Lawrence Okoye, Brett Morse, Carl Marscoff, myself, All the previous year had all thrown, if you like, an A standard, which was 65 meters. 2012, I think Carl had thrown an A standard, which is again a 65. Lawrence had thrown the A standard. I hadn't yet, and I think Brett had not yet from memory. And then at the trials, as you rightly said, Lawrence won, but Brett was second. I was third, but neither Brett or I had the A standard. Go to Europeans, didn't throw as well as I'd like, and literally the competition, I then get flown back into the UK to meet in Northwest London, and it was last chance saloon, effectively. So, I mean, if you like, the pressure was on, and I think for me, it was just about reinforcing the work I'd done and really focusing in. It wasn't a case of I couldn't throw it. It was a case of calming down, if I'm honest, just calming down, having faith in the work I've done, my ability, and just focusing on what I've been doing. That particular year was a tough year. I never ever came out and talked about it, but I'd actually got injured in South Africa in January. So I was carrying a hamstring injury, which had healed, but it just kept niggling. And then for me, that was, although at the back of my mind, I was anxious because I wanted to make sure I could, one, compete and qualify, and two, make sure I compete well at the Olympic Games. So once I had got to North London, I just said, I'm going to give it my all. Really, really focused on my technique, really focused on what I needed to do. And I remember actually every time before I walked into the circle, I'm even doing it now, I literally just close my eyes and visualize what the throw should look like, what a good throw would look like, and what I needed to do to get into the position to allow me to do the throw I needed. And that visualization was what helped me, because as soon as I got in there, all I did was replicate exactly what I'd seen in my mind. And as you rightly said, I threw 65, 24 that day. I think I also threw a couple of 64s that day, which is quite pleasing. So clearly it was already in there. I just needed to focus. So that was, although it was a stressful period, I think it brought out the best out of me. I mean, I think there have been various wise individuals that will say sometimes being under pressure probably brings the best out of people, but for me, it definitely does. I think I definitely strive under pressure. I like the adrenaline. I think most people involved in sports at any elite level would probably testify to enjoying that feeling in the back of your mind where it might go wrong, but equally it might go extremely well. And whichever way it goes, that you always just fully commit. And that's exactly what I did.
And so fast forward a month and you're there in the less than a month in a way. You're there in the Olympic Stadium in front of over 80,000 people, competing for your country in the Olympics. I mean, I don't want to overplay it or underplay it now, but for me, that, like, I think for any very amateur, very average sportsman like myself, is probably, I would have thought, one of the most proudest periods of your life. Obviously kids and marriage and other things like that obviously in the mix, but like, you know, knowing and the validation, the positive validation of thinking, you know, all of this was worth it to get me to this stage, to be able to share this with all the people and loved ones, and for myself to go and now experience it, must have been something incredibly special.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. It's really weird, actually. I had mixed feelings about the Olympics to begin with. So, leading into it, my coach at the time decided that he actually felt, or whether he wasn't enjoying it, he just didn't want to take me to the Olympics anymore. And it was that came as a massive, massive shock to me, because there's literally me and probably two others in the group. So it was a tiny, small group, very, very close, if you like, family type group. So that year, although I was ecstatic about making a team, I was almost disappointed I couldn't share it. with my coach. I mean, he decided eventually that he'd come along and literally retire from after the London 2012. But yeah, I mean, when I got there, oh my goodness, I was over the moon. I mean, for me, growing up in an estate, to now competing for my country with my teammates, my club mates, it was out of this world. And then seeing the guys that I've been competing against globally at the Olympics too, I was pleased for them. For them, it's also a massive achievement. And then seeing my friends across different sports too, it's fantastic. And then, do you know what? Walking into that stadium was surreal. It was my second time in the stadium. My first was the test event they did in the I think Easter period. I think they had the university games or something like that. I think March or April. So I went along to the test event just to get a feel of the circle in the stadium, but it was empty. I mean, it was besides the students. So when you walk into a stadium of 80,000 people with the noise that it comes with, it's electrifying. I mean, I have no hair on my head. All of a sudden, the hair little bits that I do got literally stood up. It was absolutely nuts. Thoroughly enjoyable. I threw just slightly over 60 meters. And although I was disappointed in my performance, I felt as though I gave it my all and I left everything there. And I didn't want to, that's one thing I wanted to come away with, which was the fact that I didn't want to go back thinking I had regrets. I wanted to just literally perform the best of my ability in the biggest competition, in my view, in the world, and do myself justice and do my family and my country justice too. Thoroughly enjoyed just the whole Olympic movement there. Seeing a lot of my friends do well. Also console some of my friends that didn't do as well as they would hope, but just enjoyed the environment. And the Olympics is a weird place. I remember doing the mental preparation for it. And I don't know who, I think it was Rebecca Adlington or somebody said, it's almost like going to Hollywood and literally you're on the red carpet. And I kid you not, it's literally like that. You see anybody and everybody there. And I remember the dining hall, it's literally the size of a football pitch, or maybe a couple of football pitches. It takes you 5 minutes to walk from one end to another. And it's almost surreal to begin with. And it's so, that's why the focus and the preparations leading into Olympics is so important, because you can easily get very distracted by everything else that's going on around you. And that would be absolutely human to do so, because there is just so much going on. But for me, I was really pleased because I had obviously my coach saying he didn't really want to be there. And then just kind of figuring out, okay, for myself, just to reinforce the focus that I had been doing for the past few years, to make sure I apply myself there. And I did. Yeah, I think for me, part of the reason that I retired in 2014 was after the games, I literally snapped my metatarsal in training in the kind of end of November 2012. And judging by the X-ray, it was hanging on by a shoe thread. So clearly my body, again, the foundation or the volume, it just couldn't handle anymore. Operation was successful. Everything was fine. But a few days later, I had some soreness in my calf, and it turns out I picked up a blood clot in my calf, which had spread very, very quickly to my lungs. And I was rushed back to hospital because I was experiencing some breathing problems. And I stayed in hospital until the week before Christmas. I was sent home for Christmas and then back in hospital on Boxing Day just to monitor the clots. Had various tests. And then for the whole of 2013, I was on warfarin just to control the clots. So my view was always to come back and compete. I was excited. 2014 would be a good year, Commonwealths again back in the UK, in Scotland, Europeans in Zurich, working for a Swiss organisation. It was a massive appeal to me. I was determined to come back, and in my mind I thought, okay, clearly my body wanted to shut down. So I was thinking, okay, we've got the World Championships in the UK. I'd like to do Rio, maybe shut down after Rio. But when I did return back into training, November 2013, my foot just wasn't the same. In terms of pivoting, I had reduced radius, so I almost had to manufacture my technique a little bit more than I would have liked. And whilst it wouldn't have been impossible, it was just, I think my body at the time was just telling me perhaps time was up, and then hence why I retired in 2014.
So as well, fascinating. And that mindset then takes you from, you've always obviously already been in the professional sphere because you had been the professional working sphere because you'd been in between working a certain amount of days a week and then going to Loughborough and doing. And at that point, did that make that transition a little bit easier to full-time sort of professional life and that mindset switch to a degree? And how I've spoken to quite a lot of athletes at different times, and I asked this question only because I always get interesting answers from it, is that a lot of the validation or the identity that a lot of athletes have is in their performance for the things that they've given up quite a lot of their lives to be able to do, i.e. I'm only as good as my run, my sprint, my time, my distance, and their identity becomes very much wrapped up in the success or relative success of the outward projection. How did you feel after a while? I don't want to turn this into a psychology session, far from it, sorry.
No.
But how did you feel from, that finite end to then going, you know what, this is the next chapter in my life, I'm feeling prepared for it. Actually, I feel almost in a way like you had that foundation when you were building yourself up to be a discus thrower. How did you feel that you were building that foundation to pivot into the professional, services setting?
To be honest with you, worried, terrified, which sounds uniquely weird given the fact that I was already in that space. As an athlete, you don't think about retirement, not at least towards the latter stage of your career. And at that time, I thought I'd recover and just literally go again. So having it kind of not necessarily forced on me, but my body telling me it's not quite there, it just felt weird. I remember when I did it, as in kind of confirmed that I was retiring and then headed back into the office, I just couldn't sit still. I literally kept walking around. I remember my colleagues giving me banter the fact that I just couldn't sit still. But I think it took me a while to just accept that I was no longer going to be throwing discus on a regular basis, and that my new home would be an office, a chair, a monitor, a keyboard, and a mouse. And during that period, I actually wanted to distance myself away from athletics. I didn't speak to many athletes. I didn't engage in the sport. I didn't want to even be near it. I don't know. I think I was angry to begin with that I didn't go on, and I think I was frustrated. Eventually, when things settled, again small wins, I realized I'm pretty one of the lucky ones. Reason being, I got to fulfill my dream, which was compete for my country at major championships and also go to the Olympic Games. And I had the bonus of a home Olympic Games. I also, unfortunately, in a sense that I was able to transition into, almost seamlessly to be fair, into another career in finance, which gave me a number of opportunities as a consequence of my performances and accolades in sport. So I started realizing that I should be grateful as opposed to be frustrated. But that period takes some time of acceptance and almost some time of just sitting there and actually thinking about what you have as opposed to what you don't and what you'd like to. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would have liked to have thrown the discus a lot more. However, I accepted very not long after that, do you know what? I can still be involved in sport that I love in a different way. And that's exactly what I did. Once I'd realized that uh, I'm comfortable with retirement and I'm comfortable in the work I'm doing in the finance, and I knew what direction I wanted to go in finance thereafter that, because at the time I was working in the investment bank, very transactional, covering fixed income equities, and it was great. So, but following the games and learning about just different sports, I knew I wanted to carve my a career in wealth management specifically. And as a consequence of that, I was able to maneuver into the private bank, because, if I'm honest, as a consequence of what I've done, contributed from my sports squad. So once I'd done that, I realized that, okay, even though I'm doing this in sport, I'd still like to be close in athletics. And that's when I started thinking about how to help other athletes, because, as I say, I was very lucky in the sense that I already had a job in banking. And even if I hadn't, at least I had some industry experience. So hopefully I would have been able to, I don't know, win an opportunity somewhere. Um, and I realized that many of my peers who were coming out of 212 and 213 only had nothing but sports on their CV. And some of these athletes were incredibly talented, had won medals across many different championships. So I came up with the idea of trying to partner with a number of my contacts in industry to help them be my friends in sport transition into industry, that provided opportunities for mentoring or any sort of support. And I really love that, because I could see the actual tangible benefits. I could see the athlete's mental health getting better. And for me, that was almost like winning, if you like, for me. As a consequence of that, I then thought about then maybe joining more boards, sporting boards, to try and shape and change the way we do things. And luckily enough, I got on the UK Athletics Commission board, along with many of my other colleagues in athletics. And one of my main passions, still my passion today, is the ability for athletes to be able to transition out of sport, or at least get support to enable them to transition out of sport. Where athletes, like many other amateur sports, I say amateur loosely, don't earn the sums that, say, if you like, an NBA basketball player or a footballer in the UK or an American footballer in the US, don't earn large sums of money. So at some point in your life as an athlete, you're going to have to get back into some sort of industry, whether that be coaching, plumber, teacher, banker, lawyer, at some stage of your life. And all I wanted to do was create a forum or a space, a safe space where athletes can be vulnerable and say, I'm really stuck, don't know what to do, could really do with your help. And have that place where they can have that honest, open conversation, such that we can be able to plug them into an environment where it helps them transition. And still doing that now, and I thoroughly love it.
Well, mate, there's one thing we can talk about there. I'd love to be able to help with that type of stuff as well, which might be for a discussion we can have offline. But I want to apologize, because I said this was only going to be a 25-minute, but actually, fantastically, and because I've been absolutely enthralled by the stuff and the stories you've said, it's gone on a bit longer than I expected. And I hope that's okay for you. But if it's all right, I'm just going to ask you one more question, which we usually ask all of our guests as we're finishing up. And this isn't to put you on the spot or anything otherwise, but what I always like asking people, and generally people that are motivated, that are process driven, that generally are positive, that are inspirational, and everything else that goes with it, is usually it comes intrinsically, but also you sometimes need some extrinsic, some outward motivation, stuff that you consume, things that you read, podcasts that you listen to, content that you've consumed, etc. Very brief. Well, it can be as long as you want, actually. Is there anything that you've read, listened to, watched, that you've really enjoyed? Either it could be just because you like switching something, or the exact opposite.
Yeah. I mean, can I kick off by saying I enjoyed Done Deal? Does that help?
It does. Wait, product placement.
So yeah, I mean, your book, Done Deal.
Apart from Done Deal.
Yeah, so Done Deal. I mean, I really enjoyed your book. I mean, I refer to it quite a lot, but I think, so your book certainly has definitely helped. It's a book, Rebel Ideas. Really like that book.
Just one, yeah.
Yeah, Matthew Said, just his books in general. Reasons, because it's just thinking differently. I think sometimes when you're in an environment where everybody's kind of doing the same thing, you get caught up. And by no means is anything wrong with that, but sometimes questioning the status quo, or thinking how can we do something differently or more efficiently, or just take a different approach. And it takes quite a brave person to just say, actually, no, I'd like to do it this way. And it gets back into almost that uncomfortable position. And I think it takes me back to my athlete days, because as an athlete, you're never comfortable, because there's someone always coming after you, right? Wants to throw further than you, jump further than you, run faster than you. So I like being at times quite uncomfortable, because it just forces me to think differently, think of different ideas, be more creative, and and also, oddly enough, I mean, it's probably quite fashionable, Jay Shetty, in terms of his just mental approach, just the simpler things in life, and just putting things in perspective. We and myself included, just you get very caught up with just the noise and distractions. So as much as possible, I try to be careful, more so now, particularly been working from home, with the type of content I consume, because I think the nature of what you consume is sadly sometimes what you bring out. So, and inadvertently, you don't even realize you're doing it. So I try and consume items that, one, I enjoy, or stuff that will bring out more positive thoughts, things that get me to think differently, or challenge differently, things that are more encouraging. I think we've also two young kids. What you want to try and do with, I mean, there's plenty of distractions that they're going to, plenty of noise they're going to be meeting at some point in their lives. But what you want to try and do, or at least to me, is try and create that safe space for them, so they realize that positivity and actually thinking positive will yield positive results. If you're negative, you think, oh, I'm going to fail it, I'm going to fail it, I'm going to fail it. But guess what? You might just do that. But if you think, okay, I'm going to be positive, I'm going to attack it, I'm going to try my best, 9 times out of 10, it yields a result that is positive. And that's how I try and do it. I mean, there's no kind of formula to say that out there that I know of. And I think most athletes will probably say the same thing. We have positive mindsets. You don't go into a big squat, a big bench, or a big dumbbell press, or whatever it is, thinking I'm not going to do it. It's just not going to happen. You go in there thinking, I'm going to attack this, and I'm going to make sure I get it. And guess what? You get it. Yeah. And similarly, when you're in the blocks in the starting race, you say to yourself, I'm going to push the blocks really hard. As soon as the gun goes, I'm out of those blocks. And my first step is going to be exactly where I want it to be. And I'm sure 9 times out of 10 it will be. So it's the same kind of thought process that I try and apply. I think that the challenge I think in industry versus sport is, sometimes in industry there are other people, other stakeholders that have a general pull in the direction you go, whereas as a professional sportsman or woman, you have almost complete autonomy. Certainly in athletics, autonomy in terms of the direction you go. So I pick my coach, I pick my physios, I pick my therapists, etc., etc. In my environment, I don't pick my colleagues. I don't pick, to some degree, sometimes even my clients, because the way things align. Sometimes, and whilst you accept that, you work with it. So rather than be negative about it, you try and be positive about it and think about how you can create new opportunities. And what I've seen has been, because of the mere fact that we've got this kind of building this alumni network for athletes, the momentum from it has been honestly astonishing at the support I have received, in terms of, actually, we recognize this is something we need, but we also recognize the fact that actually it'd be good to have a database of all our athletes, such that we can just appreciate some of the legends we've had. I mean, as I say, when I first started athletics, my first memory was like Linford. Would you believe in 2011, I was on a plane with Linford to Korea. He was coaching. I sat there with him. I said to him, look, I literally watched you, and I wanted to be as a thrower. And here we are, I'm sat with my hero. So to some extent, for me, it was a dream come true. I'm sat with somebody that I watched on TV for many, many years, winning medals. And here I am as an athlete, sitting next to this guy, having a cup of tea and discussing athletics and putting the world to rights. So look, I guess for me, it's just being positive, being around positive people, changing your environment, being aware of the stuff you consume. I've always enjoyed reading, but since lockdown, I've really enjoyed just consuming as much information, positive information, as possible. And social media clearly is one place of capturing a lot of this. But I think social media, with all its ills, if you don't pull away or know when to pull away, you can easily get quite caught up in it. So I now restrict the amount of social media I do, and literally read what I need to read and get back to just focusing on some positive things.
Great end to a fantastic, really interesting talk, mate. Thank you so much for coming on to talk. And I think this could be the first of a few little discussions that we'll have on various things. So thank you again. And yeah, so much for 30 minutes. It's turned into an hour, but probably one of the most interesting hours I've had in a long time. So thanks again, mate.
Ben, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.